There are many things going on in the world right now, and especially in Syria. Recently, the the Al Qaeda split group, who are for the most part was considered a moderate version of Al Qaeda, which is still bad, they take over Syria, which ended the 50-year rule of the Assad family and kicking out the fascist dictator. You know, which that part is a good thing. Now, the future of Syria is at stake because it's one of the most complicated civil wars in history, right next to the Lebanese civil war in the 80s and the Spanish civil war in the 30s. And right now, basically, it boils down into two fundamental sides. There is more complicated than that. But there's two fundamental sides. There's the Islamic HT and the anarchist Rojava. I know I made multiple videos about this, and for me, like I said, we should support Rojava because they're going to be attacked on all sides, not just by the Islamic group, but also Turkey with their funded Free Syria army, who are want to take over Rojava region to eliminate the anarchist society, and now Israel has recently attacked the Syria as well to their greater fascist goal of creating a greater Israel. So yes, that's one thing. And I wanted to respond two videos in particular about when it comes to violence and war. That we are still technically living one of the most peaceful periods in human history. Like even all the worlds put together, the death toll doesn't even reach 500,000, which is well, it's still a lot for me personally speaking, but it's still a lot peaceful than it was back then. The increased violence going on in the world. It's no secret if you've been to my blog or I did a few videos, I'm a pacifist. Many people consider that a coward. But no, a study has shown that nonviolent tactics is more successful than violent ones. And in fact, the state it has a monopoly of violence. It wants the left to use violence so they can use their justification to suppress us. That has been a historical fact throughout history. That people who are communists and socialists and anarchists who embrace violence will undo their own revolution, especially within the Marxist tradition. If the historically speaking, Stalinists and Maoists has joined forces with fascists on a couple of occasions, like Mao Zedong joining forces and recruiting people from the Kuomintang, or Lenin recruiting Tsarists in his ranks, or Stalin who wanted to join allies with Hitler until he did Operation Barbarossa, which shocked him, and that's why he declared war against Hitler. He wanted to make allies with Hitler. In many cases where these Marxist-Leninists and fascists joined forces to eliminate the anarchists. That happened in Spain, that happened in Ukraine, that happened in Korea, etc. It's no secret. Especially even the more left-wing version of communism, like libertarian Marxism, for example, also this as well. Like many people of the Council Communist movement who got mad at the May '68 revolt in France, who wanted to make their own vanguard to tell people what to do, even though it was mostly a grassroots movement, or the PLL in Palestine, who was against the first Intifada because they couldn't control it, so they did the Oslo Accord as an indirect reason to take down this pacifist anarchist movement, which was the closest they ever got to achieve independence for Palestine. But they sabotaged their own goal because they wanted to be empowered. The same thing happened with the Council Communists, for example, or the Situationists International, who basically had a cult of personality pretty much, or the Social Democratic Party of Germany joining forces with the fascists as the ending the communist revolution in Germany and killing Rosa Luxemburg, or the Japanese Red Army, who was basically a cult by all kinds of purposes. The same thing, there are multiple examples for our history. Like once you embrace violence, hierarchy, and authoritarianism, no matter how revolution you are, you will join the wrong side because you become an opportunist in many occasions. And even then, there's like we should not embrace it. We should be like the Zapatistas. People think about the Zapatistas as a violent group because they focus about the early days of the Zapatista uprising, but it's they laid down their arms. They became a pacifist group for over 30 years now, and it's become the most peaceful area of all of Mexico. And it's the only place where the cartels had no control or influence, despite the cartel using extreme violence against the country and against the Zapatista. And also many examples like Marxist Leninist or Democratic Socialist Party portraying the revolution, like Trotsky, who first proposed the concentration camps that Stalin implemented. In fact, if you really put an example, Trotskyism is just Stalinism without putting in practice in many cases. And there's also like Spain under the Socialist Party of Spain, who implemented a death squad to fight against the Basque separatist movement, or French communists, that they basically started the fucking Vietnam War to begin with. It's like there's a whole lot of shit, but that's besides the point. The point is, like, there are two videos I want to point out real quick. The one about Kierkegaard, and one from Lija Miller. Although I do enjoy her video, despite calling herself a Democrat socialist, she's a social democrat. And Curtis said trying to promote the idea that the long peace, although there is true to the extent that there is the most peaceful period, but it's amazing how he informs certain conflicts. For example, he talks about the current if the like interstate wars are becoming a thing again, as if it wasn't not being a thing since the Cold War, right? For example, he talks about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, says for the first time since World War II there was a war in Europe or one country invading out. No, that was the Georgian Russian-Georgian War, also known the Five-Day War, that happened in 2000. There's been multiple wars during the Caucasus in the Balkan region, since the Cold War ended. Nothing new. He also mentioned about Israel and Hamas as something new. No, the conflict's been around since the 1880s, so nothing new there. So I don't know why he's saying this is nothing new. And the part that Curtis said doesn't point that the reason many of these wars are still going, he only mentioned one thing. It's like it's still former colonies because the enforcement of colonialism, imperialism still affect the World Bank Organization, for example, or the IMDF, or many causes of the economic inequality that cause conflict. And these wars, even though the Columbine Pact made war illegal, but nobody enforces this law. In fact, the United States has consistently violated the Caleb-Bryan Pact. It also violated the UNSCR 1080-20, 1325, the Enforced Nuclear Disarmament Economic Conversion Act, the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, the Enforced Convention of the Prohibition of Development, Production, and Stockpiling of Biological Toxic Weapons, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapon, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the Article 51 of the UN Charter, Armed Trade Treaty, the Rome Statute, the you know, and many other things as well. That no country enforce is like goes against their interests. In fact, the very concept of borders they even mention is the cause of these conflicts. Abolish the fucking borders. That's the reason why we have these are artificial made up lines. The reason we have the Middle East as chaotic as it is because a bunch of imperialists wrote random lines in the sand, quite literally, that causes over a century of conflict and war. Like that's the main problem. And people think violence is necessary. No, violence is the cause of all these problems. If we respond violence with violence, it's a recycle that never ends, like a or borders. And another thing we have to point out, the YouTuber Achemene, who was a lawyer, well, used to be a lawyer, she's not a lawyer anymore, but like a former lawyer who trying to make a case for violence because, like one definitely or justify the millions and deaths of the corporate system of the private healthcare system. On the surface sounds fair, but that's the problem. That is the trick. The state has a monopoly of violence. It wants us, the people, to use violence. So they use that as an excuse to oppress us. Okay? Uh, what we see today with the healthcare CEO assassination is an example of propaganda of the deed and illegalism, the idea first developed by anarchists and then by the 70s and 80s used by Marxist Leninists, which all ended in failure, by the way, and created basically cults, like I mentioned, the Japanese Red Army, for example. And all of them were spectacular failures, with the one possible exception of the Tumparus in Uruguay, who conquered one town, and that's about it before they all got arrested, and the Puerto Rican Boricua Popular Army, los macheteros, who were never defeated militarily, but they never achieved their goals. That's one example. Because these types of actions don't work, and it's been historically shown the case from the late 19th century, early 20th century by the anarchists, and the 70s and 80s by Marxist-Leninists has shown that's not the case. The first international terrorist, Carlos Chacao from the PLO, proved to be the case. He became a narcissist. He wasn't even a revolutionary. He was just a poor rich guy. Because, like I said, the state has a monopoly of violence because they only are allowed to use violence using the police and the armed forces. And if somebody breaks that monopoly, they will be cracked down, even though you have nothing to do with the violence in question. Now, with this happening, this will naturally lead to creation of secret police, even though the United States already has it. The COINTELPRO never ended, by the way. Like a good example would be the 19th century when propaganda of the deed was at its peak, where for the first time the entire continent of Europe, which at the time was like 20 something countries, co-op a multinational cooperation for the sole purpose to crack down anarchism because it was becoming popular as a movement because they were using violence of the propaganda that they did and the assassination of many princes, royals, duchesses, etc. The Anti-Anarchist Conference 1898. This was the first ever war on terror. They were making their own proto-NATO 20 years before the League of Nations, and they created a disinformation campaign that turned anarchists, a political philosophy that goes back centuries, to an apolitical violence for violence sake. And it was successful, ending the revolution because America was going close with an anarchist revolution because the minor wars were just a few decades away, the largest armed uprising since the American Civil War, and also the closer they got to a communist revolution as well, because many people were like joining the communist cause, like the St. Louis Commune, for example. Again, they were extremely taken down by the president and other people using extreme violence indiscriminately. And Edgar Miller points to the great lever, although I do enjoy the book, if they talks about violence is necessary to reduce inequality. But the problem is inequality, the reason it exists in the first place is because of violence. Archaeology has shown that before hierarchy was established 12,000 years ago, from the first Homo sapiens to 12,000 years ago, only 3% of all deaths in the world throughout the 300 plus years of history was violent deaths. And when hierarchy was first established 12,000 years ago, from 12% that from between 12,000 years ago to 5,000 years ago, which is a very, very short period of time compared to the previous example, that 3% rose to 15%. The rise of the first kings in the Balkans, patriarchy, the dehumanization of women, etc. It is a great connection. In fact, there's such a thing as called peaceful societies, indigenous cultures who had no concept of violence whatsoever. And those within that still function under anarchist communism. And instead of using extreme violence, they use other tactics like gossip, humiliation, exile, discourage non-violent tactics that actively discourage them to do power, to take hold of power. It has been worked for 100,000 years. And when she points World War II, that's a reduction in inequality of wealth, people forget the reason that inequality wasn't through violence, it's because they used socialist economic style. For example, nationalization of many businesses in the United States, progressive taxation up to 45%. That doesn't require violence. And also, the reason World War II even started, the reason Hitler had power in the first place is because of capitalism, especially from the US, UK, Germany, and other wealthy businessmen giving money to fascists because they were afraid they would be taken over by communists and socialists and anarchists at the time. They were afraid they're gonna use their power, so they give money to fucking Nazis to maintain that power. And now we have a multiple country under fascist regime right now, like United States, China, Russia, este, like I was about to say Syria, but not anymore. South Korea, Japan, they're all under fascist dictators right now. This is nothing new. In fact, they now the fascists love violence. If they see you commit violence, they have an excuse to do more violence. And we point to Thomas Piketty's Four Horsemen of Equality. Many of those said, "Oh, you don't need violence." One example she mentioned about the Aztec civilization, where the state collapsed and where some but people were equal because there was no state, there was no money, but people were free. Again, doesn't require violence. Again, you don't need, as long as you eliminate the state and hierarchy, less violence automatically reduce. Automatically, the state is the one keeping it in the first place. There are ways to do a better, more effective way. Non-violence is a better alternative, and it's been proven scientifically. Again, if we don't give the state what they want, and remember, the person who killed the CEO is a right-wing reactionary. He's a Elon Musk fan. The same Elon Musk who's an open fascist, who his family members were supporters of the Nazi regime and apartheid South Africa. Yeah, that guy. And the person who tried to assassinate Trump was also a Republican. So there's that. So yeah. So thank you everybody. I got a good recommendation to learn about these types of things. So see you guys next time.